Hi there. I just want to know if you can hear me. And if you can, could you just let me know in the chat box? Great. Thank you very much. We'll get started in about 8 minutes, but thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. Just a couple items before we get started. We should have a support person on with us who will give us the links to where this webinar and other past webinars are archived on our website. And also be able to give you some, non-content related support as we go through the presentation. Okay. Also, if you have questions as we proceed, please feel free to put them in the chat box or the question and answer box, so you don't forget them as you think about them as we're going along. However, I won't answer them. I won't get to them until the end. Okay. Or I'll kind of open it up for question and answers. Okay, so to get started, this is the Chapter 2, which is typically the literature review. Our kind of model is based on kind of a standard 5-chapter dissertation model, which Chapter 1 is the introduction, which is kind of the blueprint for the study. Chapter 2 is the literature review. Chapter 3 is the methodology. Chapter 4 is the results. Chapter 5 is the discussion of the results. Always, you're going to hear me say this several times throughout the presentation, always obtain your school's template if they have one, if you can, or guidelines for the dissertation, because while a lot of the features in the chapters are similar across dissertations and across schools, sometimes schools will have, some particulars that are specific to the school. So, I mean, if your school doesn't have one, you can use a general template. That's fine. But usually your school will have one, or even your chair may be able to provide one, or sometimes your chair will provide an example dissertation that they want you to follow. But always see if your school has a specific template they want you to follow. But again, our guidelines are going to be pretty typical. Okay, so the Chapter 2, the literature review, here's what we're going to cover. And this is, again, pretty typical of a literature review. Just to pause a moment and just kind of to get a big picture, to pull back and talk a little bit about the purpose of the literature review. Because, if you don't really understand its purpose, it's fine, because, you've never written a dissertation before. You may not know everything about it. So let's just go over what the literature review is about. I mean, yes, you are kind of reviewing literature on your topic to see what's been done on your topic. But the purpose too is not just to kind of review it and see what people have said and what people have found. It's also to kind of, it also makes an argument for your research problem. It also makes an argument for the rationale for the need to conduct your study. So when you're writing it all the way through, you should have in the back of your mind that you want to be leading to, by showing what researchers have done on your topic. You're also looking for gaps and also looking for the things that they haven't covered. And that's going to help make a case for why your study is needed. So that's something to keep in mind. There's kind of a larger, point to the lit review, other than just kind of surveying or reviewing recent studies on your topic. It's to really kind of drive home this message that, hey, look, here's what's in the literature, but there are some things that are not covered, and that's what my study is designed to address. Okay, so typical features of lit reviews, and really compared to other chapters, there's really not many sections. Now, when we get into the review of the literature section, there may be several like subsections, because you're going to separate that out topically. But as far as the larger sections, this is about it. Okay, the introduction to the literature review. Again, always follow what your school template wants you to put in there. But usually you just, it's like all introductions, you want to reorient your reader, right? So you can restate the purpose of your study and remind the reader of why your study is needed, remind them of the importance of it, why you're conducting it. And you can end by, the section by previewing contents of the chapter if you want, or the sections that are going to follow. So again, it's just a reminder, a reorientation for your reader of your purpose, what you're doing, and why. Probably about a page, maybe less than a page introduction. Okay. Again, check your template. Not all schools have this, but most of them do. Something called sometimes it's called a literature search strategy or methods of searching. And what this section is about is you want to convey to your professors, to your reader, the search that you conducted, the steps that you took, what you searched, the search terms, what databases you searched, to show them that you covered a lot of ground, that you performed a comprehensive search, because they want to feel confident that you haven't missed anything, right? So by describing, the databases you looked at, the search terms you used, kind of a little bit about your process, it helps them to understand and show them that, yeah, you covered a lot of ground. You covered everything that needs to be covered in your search. So you casted a net that was able to get everything you needed. So describe your search. So, start off the section by describing your search as being comprehensive. Usually you can, a lot of searches now are online. You don't actually have to walk into a library. In any university you're at, online universities, they have a library portal that you can access if you're a student. And usually through those library portals, you have access to all the academic databases you need. So, mention which libraries, you used the library portal for what university. You want to list the databases and the search tools that you searched and that you used. Some databases are specific to disciplines, like if you're in education, ERIC, it's an acronym, ERIC. That's a big database for education. There's business databases if you're doing a business study. There's also these mega search tools, like Google is basically a big search tool that searches multiple databases. And there's several of those, and usually in academic libraries, like Academic Source Complete, Academic Source Premier. These are things that you type in your search terms, and it searches a lot of databases. So you don't have to search specific databases. So any search tools like that that you use, Academic Search Complete, Google Scholar is another one, or any specific databases. It's always good to, if you are doing, say, an educational study, to go to specific databases also, like ERIC. Sometimes your chair will ask you if you search, such and such journal, because it's a really important journal in your area. If you searched any specific journals, you want to include those too. It's important to also include the key terms that you used to search for material and the combinations of the terms. And this isn't going to be any surprise, right? Because these are going to be your variables, the things that you're studying. The items, the variables, the factors, the major concepts. That's what your search terms are going to be. And this next part is really important. The last part, include any way that you filtered, that you qualified your search. So some typical ones and easy ones are like English only. If you only wanted material material returned that was in English, if you only wanted material returned that was full text. But the next two were really important: date of publication and peer-reviewed. Again, check with your school for some literature reviews. The school requires that the studies and the articles that you review be recent, within like 5 years of when you're going to complete your dissertation. Some schools it's like 5 to 7 years. Some schools it's 10 years. Some schools don't have a requirement, you know. So whatever your school's requirement is, you want to make sure that you indicated that you stayed within those boundaries, right? So if they want material that's recent within 5 years, you know, say that you constrained your search to, you know, to those years. And all of them, regardless of school, they all want peer-reviewed research. All right. I mean, that is the gold standard for your lit review. They don't want, you know, you like digging into websites. Now you can use websites sparingly, but only for informational purposes. Like, so if you needed a statistic or something like that from, you know, from like a government website or a state website or something like that, you could use that for a statistic, but you're not going to be reviewing, you know, analyzing the material on the website. So it's the peer-reviewed article or the peer-reviewed study that is really what is going to primarily be reviewed in your literature review. And so it's important to indicate that in this section that the material that you look for was peer-reviewed. Now, how do you know if something's peer-reviewed? A lot of libraries these days, the search, whatever you know, the search bars and the search mechanisms, they usually will indicate if you know, the information that you get on the you know, the primary information, the abstract, the title, the author, will usually indicate whether the article is peer-reviewed. If it doesn't, there is something called Ulrichs. Let me type it in here. And you can access this through your, you know, your library's library portal, to online library portal. And this is a service that will let you know if journals are peer reviewed. And if, you know, your article comes from that specific journal, then it's you know, it's peer reviewed. But again, usually the information like the title and the abstract and the author, that information will contain whether the article is peer reviewed. Also, when you filter your search, right, when you say just return hits to me that are peer reviewed, usually that helps ensure that whatever you get back is peer reviewed. Okay, so this section is not long, usually maybe a solid paragraph, a couple paragraphs, you know, just as long as you cover these kind of, you cover your bases as far as the things that you searched, the databases, the search tools, your search terms. And like a section like this, and even the whole literature review really, and other sections of the dissertation, it's, you know, use your resources, you know, webinars, things like this, what you can find on the internet that's reputable. But sometimes there's just no substitute for having a good example, right? So in other words, having an approved dissertation from your school, you know, close to what you're doing, maybe even by the same chair. You have that, you know, at hand when you're drafting some of these sections. It'll give you an idea of what other people have done, especially for something like this if you're not quite really sure what it should contain. Okay, again, check your school's template. Theoretical framework sometimes, usually comes next. Some schools are different. Some schools have the theoretical framework on chapter 1 and, you know, more of an elaboration on the theoretical framework in chapter 2. some schools only have the theoretical framework in chapter 1. Some schools only have it in chapter 2. So again, check your template. But if it comes, if it's required in the chapter 2, which is fairly typical, this is where it goes. And here's some of the components of the theoretical framework. I guess the first question that a lot of people ask is, there's theoretical framework, conceptual framework, right? What's the difference? I take a very practical approach to it, right? And in my experience, theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies, and conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. So almost always, you only need one. I've seen people need 2 before, but in special situations, but extremely rarely. Most of the time, you just need a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework. Again, if you're quant, go theoretical. If you're qual, do a conceptual framework. Okay. So what are they? So these are, it's kind of conceptual or theoretical foundations of some of the major components of your study that's going to help kind of guide your study and also help guide the, your explanations and your interpretation of the findings in chapter 5. So how to handle this situation? Again, look at examples of approved dissertations. But first of all, you just want to start with a clear statement of the theory that is going to serve as your theoretical framework, right? Self-determination theory, have a source, right? Who developed it, the year, will serve as a theoretical framework for this study. Self-determination theory is or refers to, and then define it, right? Very, very quickly after you say what you're going to use, define the theory. Talk a little bit about what the person who developed it to explain, because that's what theories do. They help us explain things. What did the person who develop it to explain? Define any associated components. Sometimes theories have components. They have tenets or assumptions or again, items or components. Define those if they relate to your study. Okay, discuss what other researchers have used the theory for, right? And not just the person who developed it, what they developed it for, but how some other people used it, other researchers. What have they used it to study? And then the important thing is to connect the framework to your study. How does it connect to what you're looking at? How does it connect to what you're doing? And how is it going to help explain what you're studying? Okay, and I know we may have more questions about this. Again, at the end, I'll be happy to cover any questions you have. Some of the questions are, do you need more than one theory? Sometimes. It all depends. All studies are different, right? So my advice is always keep the theoretical framework as streamlined as possible, right? Because the more theories you bring in, the more you're going to have to define them, the more you're going to have to explain them, the more you're going to have to explain their connection to your study, the more you're going to have to talk about in chapter 5. So and you may not need extra theories. So always keep the theoretical framework as streamlined and as relevant to what you're doing as possible. So sometimes it only requires one theory. Sometimes it may require more than one theory. So let's just take an example. Let's say you're conducting a quantitative study, on the relationship between emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. Okay, so there's your framework right there, right? It would be the theoretical foundations of emotional intelligence, the theoretical foundations of transformational leadership. That's what's going to constitute your theoretical framework. So in that case, you would need 2 theories. Another thing to be cognizant of with the theoretical framework, if you're doing quant. Your instrument that you're using is going to have a say in the theory that you use, right? So let's stick with our example about emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. If you're using, let's say Goleman is the person who helped develop and popularize emotional intelligence. Goleman, if you're using Goleman's survey or questionnaire to measure emotional intelligence, you would then want to use Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence, okay? Because there are different instruments for a lot of these constructs, right? There's several instruments to measure emotional intelligence. So you don't want to use Goleman's instrument, but then use Smith's theory. You see what I mean? Because the theories also are going to have some differences, even though, you know, in large part they're going to be similar, but they will have differences. So the point is, whoever's instrument you're using, you want to use their theoretical foundations. So again, Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence, if you're using his instrument, not somebody else's. So make sure those things align. For qualitative studies, a conceptual framework is a little different. Sometimes there's not like an overarching theory for what you're doing, because qualitative studies are sometimes more exploratory. You know, you're trying to find things out that we don't really know yet. And so a conceptual framework is usually built on, you know, the conceptual understandings of some of the major concepts of your study. So you might have to take, you know, the concept or a couple concepts, see what the literature says about them, and use that as your kind of conceptual framework. Put it together for your framework. Okay, and the theoretical framework, how long? You know, a few pages usually. Sometimes your schools have requirements, sometimes they don't, just as long as you touch on everything that you need to. The review of the literature, this is going to be the bulk of the literature review, right? I mean, you have the introduction, the theoretical framework, the literature search strategy, and a summary at the end. This is going to be probably 80–85% of the literature review. And this is where everything is really specific to your study, right? And section this, you're going to have to section this part out because it's going to be, you know, long, and you just can't have one solid block of text. I mean, even with paragraphs, it's not reader friendly, it's not writer friendly. So a good thing to do is subsection this section out, right? With topical headers, right? So this would, again, if you're doing a study on emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you're going to have sections on research on, you know, emotional intelligence. You're going to have sections that you review material on transformational leadership. And even within those sections, you might even have to subsection farther based on topics that are in the literature. You know, what kind of topics and trends are emerging in the literature as you review the information, right? And so it's helpful for you as a writer. It's also helpful for your reader if you can section things out based on topics or themes. And that is going to be different because you're just going to have to see what's in the literature that you're reviewing. Okay, so it's the purpose of this is to, you know, cover recent literature on your factors, your variables, your major concepts. Okay, we talked about that. Use headers to organize the material. Organize material in sections that typically have a section introduction, and then reviewing the material. Okay, and reviewing research consists of synthesis and analysis, right? So you're not just kind of hitting one study after another. You're also synthesizing material. And let's see. Okay, here we go. And synthesis just means to combine parts to form a whole, right? So you're combining information from different studies to help make points. And the best place to think of synthesis is at the paragraph level. And what's challenging about the lit review is you have so much material. You have, you may have, 50 or more studies that you're looking at, or sometimes maybe not that many, but a lot of material, and it gets overwhelming kind of pretty quickly. And then you start writing about stuff, and you kind of lose your train of thought. You lose where you were. And professors tell students this too, and I like to remind students that you know how to organize things, right? We learned this at the paragraph level. We learned this in junior high or wherever. A paragraph includes a topic sentence, evidence or material that illustrates what your topic is, and then some kind of summary section, or it might transition to the next paragraph. Okay. And these paragraphs are going to be like the building block, right? If you can keep your organization straight at the paragraph level, it helps everything else. It helps, the sections be organized, and then ultimately the chapter be organized. It's just good to keep in mind, because again, you're going to have a lot of information, and it's easy to get kind of awash in information. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. So I've color coded it. This is an example of a synthesis at the paragraph level. So you have a topic sentence. I'll read a little bit, but I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because you can see it. Research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. Okay, topic sentence. The material in green, which I've highlighted at the beginning and at the end, this talks about the topic, right? It's material brought in from the studies that support the point that's made in the topic sentence. And then you can see the last one is the summary sentence. Empirical evidence from recent research largely supports that diabetic health literacy is a vital component of patients' self-efficacy, diabetic control, and clinical outcomes. And a couple of things to note here. When in the first sentence, I say recent research has mostly, and then at the end sentence where I say research largely, because there is one in here that doesn't. There's a study in here that shows something different. So that's why I qualified the statement, right, by saying mostly and by saying largely. If you see, the first 2 or 3 examples support, and then if you look down where it says unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al. This is like about the second sentence to the end. Unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes, self-knowledge, and glycemic control, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So there was one that was different, but I accounted for it. And so, if that's the case, you can include that in there. You just have to make sure that you acknowledge it. And also, there's a little bit of analysis in here, in the sense that I explained why this person's findings may be different than all the rest. That's at the end of the sentence where it says, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So that's a little bit of analysis, right? So a little bit of an evaluation, right? So the study may have had problems, a small sample size that affects results. Okay, so just an example of synthesis and paragraph organization and a little bit of analysis, because that's our next topic here is analysis. So you're not just kind of writing a summary of every study, right? Because if you were doing that, you would just be able to get away with an annotated bibliography, because that's what an annotated bibliography is, where you just summarize, right? And there's no commentary. So part of the lit review is analysis or evaluation. So you want to notice, any shortcomings of the studies, not every one, but, if there's things that stand out as weaknesses or shortcomings, note them. Gaps, trends, trends will help you identify topics, like are there certain topics are trending in the research. That's going to help you with find subsections. Gaps in the research are helpful because, remember, the lit review it's a review of the literature, but you're also ultimately kind of making that case for your own study. So any gaps or shortcomings, where researchers have studied something, but it's not really what you're doing, any opportunity for you to highlight that, you need to do it. Okay, and reiterate your research problem and the need for your study where appropriate. Again, where there's an opportunity, where there's a gap, make a connection to your study and make a connection to why your study is needed. And again, the whole thing culminates in an argument for conducting your study. So when you get to the summary, not only should you recap major points from the chapter, but remind the reader of the research problem that's based on what is and what is not in the literature, based on what you just reviewed, and reiterate, of course, the need for your study. Now, I know that's the lit review in a nutshell. It's easier talked about than completed. I get it. It's long, and there's a lot of material that needs to be, focused and synthesized and reviewed. But that's the idea of the lit review, and that's some of the, the typical components and what's expected. How long? Let me see if I anticipate this question. How long is the lit review? I'll tell you what the sweet spot is, but schools may have their own requirements. Some schools, require 20 pages. Some schools require 30. Some schools require 40. Some schools have no requirements. I've seen 5-page lit reviews. I've seen 80-page lit reviews. The sweet spot tends to be about 25 to 30 pages. And again, I'm just saying that with the caveat that, check with what your school requires or your chair. But typically, 20 to 30, 25 to 30, something like that is usually the sweet spot. Oops. Okay. And this is who we are. This is what we do. Here's some of our contact information if you want to just talk to somebody to see if what we offer is right for what you need. Contact us by email or phone. And now I'm going to turn it over to see if you have questions. If you have questions, just type them in the chat box or the question and answer box. I'd be happy to try to answer them for you. Excuse me. No questions on the chapter 2? Everybody's good with the lit review? Ulrich's, yeah, I have one here. It says, can you repeat how to access Ulrich's? It should be accessible in your, however you get into your school's online library, your school's online library portal, where you're going to do all your searching. It should be just kind of like another academic tool. How do you recommend organizing this data? Well, again, it's going to be organized based on what you're doing, right? So it's, I go back to my example, the study on emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. You're going to have a section on emotional leadership. You're going to introduce emotional intelligence. You're going to introduce emotional intelligence. You're going to start bringing in recent research on it, to see what people have been doing on it. And then within these, the topics of emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you're going to have to break it down even further to see what kind of themes or topics are coming out of the literature. Let's say you went back 5 years, the literature, 5 years, what have researchers been focusing on in emotional intelligence research? So part of it's going to be, dependent on what's in the, what's trending, right? What researchers are focusing on. So organize it, in a large sense by your variables, your components of your study, right? Because it's not a general discussion. It's a review of research specifically on what you're doing. So it needs to follow your factors, your variables, your major components. And then sometimes within those, you may have to subsection based on kind of the topics that seem to be emerging on emotional intelligence or whatever it is in the literature. I hope that helps. Okay, let's see, I got a few questions here. How can you apply this in a 3-paper discussion? Or I'm sorry, a 3-paper dissertation? Yeah, I'm not real sure what a 3-paper dissertation is. I know folks do them, but we don't encounter those a lot. I would say that whatever you're doing still needs a lit review. I don't see the lit review as changing very much as far as the nature of it, unless you have, I don't know if that would mean you need 3 different lit reviews, because I'm not real sure of the structure of a 3-paper dissertation. But I wouldn't think that the lit review would really change. I would think the purpose would still pretty much be the same. Okay, how about recommendations for mixed methods, theoretical frameworks? Yeah, mixed methods. Do you need like a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework? Maybe. I hate to give you answers like that, but all studies are different. If it makes sense to have a theoretical framework for your quantitative part and a conceptual framework for your qualitative part, that does make sense. But sometimes, again, it depends on the nature of the mixed method study. Sometimes mixed methods studies are, the major portion is quantitative, and you're just going to ask a few qualitative questions to help explain, the quantitative data, or vice versa. The most of it's qualitative, and you're just going to have a few quantitative questions to kind of tidy up some issues. In that case, I would think you would maybe just need one. Would encompass everything, but if they're kind of fairly equally weighted, you may need a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework, one for each component of the study. And again, that's a good question for your chair too, because some of this stuff is, like I said, study specific, and it depends on what you're doing, but your chair, I think, would be the final arbiter of that. Okay, please touch upon types of quantitative methods of review. I'm not sure what you mean when you say quantitative methods of review exactly. If you could just elaborate on that, I'd be happy to come back to it. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, if you scroll back up to the top of this, the chat box, there's a webinar archive library. There's a link there, and the webinars, this one and other past webinars, are archived there. I think you also get a copy in your email. I'm not sure about that, but I think so. Yep, Brittany's already on it. Thank you. What would be a good strategy for approaching a theory that is relatively new or doesn't have a lot of literature on it yet? I'm not sure. You just have to say whatever there is to say about it up to this point, I would guess. Sometimes, your chair may not like that. I don't know, because the theory isn't precisely because the theory is new. It hasn't been tested. So that may be a question for your chair, but if you can use a new theory, I would just guess that you would just have to say as much about it as possible to the point, right? Just kind of review what's out there and describe it as much as you can. Because if this is a theory, there should be a definition, and there should be components, and there should be some discussion on it. The rub is just that it hasn't been tested or used a lot. In the theoretical foundation section, is the diagram model necessary? Okay, yeah, okay. For the theoretical foundation or framework section, do you need a diagram? No, you don't need one. Diagrams are helpful if things seem to be complex and, in words, like describing them in words, and it's hard for somebody to kind of visualize or understand, then diagrams can be helpful. But you don't need one. You don't need one. Unless it's needed for intelligibility, but it's not required. That's the word I'm looking for. Like meta-analysis and biometric analysis, what other methods are popular? Quantitative for the lit review. Well, meta-analysis is a kind of study, really. It's so these lit reviews are not meta-analyses in the sense that there's no kind of quantitative analysis to it. So yeah, and bibliometric analysis, that sounds like analysis also. So that's not what these kinds of lit reviews are, if that helps. So those things would not be required in this kind of lit review, unless they were something specific to what you're doing in your study. And do you need permission to use a model? Yes, you do. If you use somebody's model, you do need permission to use it, and to especially the diagram, right? The model diagram, you do. And I don't know much about it, but I think you just write to the person and tell them what you're doing, and usually they give you permission. Now, I believe if you adapt a model or modify it, or only use part of it, then you do not need to have permission. I'm pretty sure about that, but you may want to double check it. Okay, great, good questions. Any other questions? All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to let you go. Thanks for attending. Oh, I'm sorry, I got another one here. Which part of the literature review we have to put hypotheses? Okay, your hypotheses usually go with your research questions. Again, check your school's template. I've seen some schools want your hypotheses at the end of the lit review. In other words, so after you've reviewed the literature, what hypotheses have you come up with, have you developed from the literature? So sometimes the hypotheses come at the end of the lit review, but more typically what I see is your hypotheses just being included in chapter 3 in your methods chapter, or the hypothesis and included in maybe in chapter 1 with your research questions, because sometimes a chapter 1 will contain a little bit of methods, like a methods section with your research questions and your hypotheses. And the chapter 3 is the extended discussion of the methodology, which would also include your research questions and hypotheses. So again, check your template. They may not be required at all in chapter 2. However, some schools I've seen, they want your hypotheses in chapter 2, but usually they come at the end. Yes, access to the recording of the webinar, yes, you're going to get them it sent to you in your email. If you scroll up in the chat box, and there's also a link for where we archive the webinars on our website. Okay, great. All right, thank you for the kind words. Any other questions? All right, great. You're welcome. You're welcome, everybody. All right, I'm going to let everybody go, and you know, like I said, good luck. And if you have questions or you want to talk to somebody just about what we offer, there's, you know, our information is at the end of the slides. All right, everybody, have a great day. And we offer other webinars on other topics and other chapters. So check our website and see what we're offering next. All right, thank you. All right, bye-bye.